Welcome everyone who's joining us today, and a special welcome to our panelists from Abcuro and Dynavax, who I will shortly let introduce themselves. We're really excited to be here today with everyone who's joining us across different organizations. I'll start with a very quick intro from the Auxilius end, and then, as I said, I will let our panelists introduce themselves. Just quick introduction to me, Kristen Lueck. I head up our customer operations team at Auxilius. My team is responsible for a range of things, including sponsor implementations, hence why we're here today to talk to you about this, sponsor implementations within Auxilius, through to supporting engagements on an ongoing basis with all of our live customers. And my team is a combination of technical accountants, clinical finance experts, data analysts, and clinical data specialists. So really kind of a range of expertise that Auxilius is bringing to the table to support with these implementations. I've been with Auxilius for about 3 years now. So from back when we only had very few customers to over 60 at this point, spreading from the small private biotechs to the mid-sized public companies to implementing pharma within Auxilius. So I think to pass the mic over, I would love for our panelists to introduce themselves, maybe give a little bit of background on your role and a little bit about your company as we go around. And maybe Ricky, you can kick us off.
Sure, happy to do that. So hi, I'm Ricky Modular. I am the VP of Finance at Abcuro. So in my role, really overseeing accounting, the FP&A function, financial reporting, everything that falls under the finance umbrella. For a little bit about Abcuro, just to give some context, we're a clinical stage biotech. We have our lead trial is a registrational phase 2/3 that just completed enrollment about 2 months ago in a rare autoimmune disease. We're privately held through our Series B, Newton, Massachusetts based, although I have all my New York stuff up here, don't be misled. We're around 40 people, and our finance team is 4 people.
Awesome. Thanks, Ricky. Dave, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Hi. Good to see everybody. My name is Dave Chen. I am Director of R&D and Global Operations Finance. I'm part of the financial planning and analysis team here at Dynavax, responsible for all forward-looking activities R&D related. A little bit about Dynavax. We're a commercial stage biopharmaceutical company. We have a focus on developing vaccines utilizing our proprietary CpG 1018 adjuvant technology. Dynavax is a commercial product, has a commercial product addressing the vaccine, hepatitis B vaccine market, and we have several other vaccines currently in development. The company is publicly traded. We have over 400 employees, both in the United States as well as in Germany. We're headquartered in the San Francisco Bay Area. In terms of the number of products that we have in development, we have a shingles product that's in phase 1 clinical trials, Tdap also in phase 1, and then we're also working with the U.S. Department of Defense in collaboration on a phase 2 clinical study for plague. So I think that's it. I'll pass it over to Emily.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here. I'm Emily Tran. I also work with David at Dynavax. We're from the same team. My focus is on implementing systems for finance and accounting. And I had the honor to learn Auxilius and help implement Auxilius smoothly with the support from Kristen's team. So I'm glad to be here to help answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for introducing yourself. I think what we are, as is kind of titled for this webinar, we'd love to talk a little bit about the implementation process. So I'm just going to go through high-level topics for today, and then I'll kind of give a very brief overview of Auxilius and our implementation process. And then I really want to shift gears and use the majority of the time today to go through kind of a more live discussion, ask you all questions, and discuss your implementations and the kind of focuses of those. And to the audience who's listening in, feel free to ask questions. You can drop them in the chat throughout. If you want to direct your question to a particular panelist, feel free to kind of call that out in your comment as well. So really excited to have you all. Let me just see the audience chat. Perfect. Yep. And as Peter noted, you can just put them directly in the chat. So I think, as I said, I wanted to start out with a very, very brief overview of Auxilius. I think most folks who are joining us today will have some background, but for those of you who are newer to Auxilius, Auxilius is really the kind of first to market FP&A and accounting software built specifically to focus around the complexity of clinical trials in that outsourced R&D spend. So really just to summarize what you're seeing here on this slide and what we'll talk about in the upcoming slides is what we are taking is that very disparate raw data. So kind of lots of different data from your vendor contracts, budgets, clinical data, your change orders, your different contracts and invoices and POs, and aggregating all of that disparate data to really support with key finance and accounting processes. So you can see those on the right-hand side of this slide. The different outputs are going to be supporting with that financial close, dynamic forecasting, and investigator spend intelligence, amongst others. And really what we want to talk about in this conversation, and we'll go through on the upcoming slides and in our panelist discussion, is going to be that process of ingesting all of that raw data, building out the models that are specific to the sponsor, and how all of that gets into the system and gets you up and running with Auxilius with your custom data in the system. And I think with that in mind, we wanted to talk a little bit specifically about what those models are that we're building out. I'll breeze through this, but then we'll talk about the steps within the implementation process. But just as a little bit of context for the people who are listening in right now, as we're building this out, we're thinking about this in kind of two different models that we're building out during implementation. The first, on this left-hand side, if you can see these visuals here, is where we're ingesting those vendor contracts, the change orders, your GL structure, building out that really centralized location so that you can have all of those budgets living in one place, have your ongoing forward-looking trial forecasts there, and produce your journal entries and accruals directly out of the system. The other side of this is going to actually just be a double click into your clinical trial spend, specifically the investigator spend within that, which we know tends to be that kind of big black box. Up to 50% of your clinical trial spend can make up that investigator piece. So really what Auxilius is trying to do on this clinical data model side is provide visibility into that spend by combining those site contracts with your clinical data, so you have that ongoing pulse of what is happening in real time within that investigator budget across all of the sites that are supporting your study. I'll put these two up here because I know as we get into the discussion, we'll talk about one versus the other and who's sort of doing what where. What we see is that across all of our customers, we have a lot of our customers who are really pulling Auxilius into the fold to support with both, to support with the kind of core process management for your accounting and FP&A side of things by pulling in your contracts. And then we have other folks who are really excited about that investigator spend intelligence and really want to focus on building that out within Auxilius. A lot of our sponsors are leveraging both of these and have built those out during our implementation phase. Some are really excited about one versus the other. So definitely don't need both of these at the same time, but they go hand in hand and get you intel really into that investigator piece, as well as a place to kind of holistically track everything else within Auxilius as well. And I think just one high level thing to note within this, Auxilius itself is really serving as a framework to support your existing processes. The goal of Auxilius within this is not to enforce some kind of process or change in methodology. What we're doing when you think about building out this budget data model is actually just ingesting all of your disparate data and getting it into one place to automate and streamline a lot of these existing processes you have and put the power back in your hands to make these decisions as to where your expense estimates and accruals come out of from the system. Awesome. So I'm going to talk a little bit about very high level what our implementation process looks like, and then we'll jump into the details of this and our discussion here. So high level, we think about our onboarding process in 3 different phases. The first being that real technical implementation, where Auxilius is supporting with building out the customer, so Abcuro and Dynavax's trial environments within Auxilius. And that's typically around an 8 to 10 week period. We then go into the hypercare period, which is the parallel close processing. So really using your system once Auxilius is stood up and you are in the environment, using it side by side with your existing process offline and being able to compare the outcome and getting comfortable with the processes before fully transitioning over into being live with Auxilius. The implementation phase is going to include the build out of both that budget and investigator model that I just walked through. It's going to optionally include an integration with your ERP or P2P system to be able to pipe in those invoices in an automated fashion. We will have customized training for sponsors, as well as acceptance testing for all the data that goes into the system. That hypercare phase, as I said, is going to include that parallel close processing with your offline process, as well as support if needed for your governance requirements, any kind of compliance requirements on the sponsor end. Auxilius has off-the-shelf materials and can also provide customized support there. And then when we go live, we kind of have a combination of tools that are available for our customers on an ongoing basis, including kind of help center, help desk access, ongoing touch points with your team, as well as trial data ingestion on an ongoing basis. And all of this is supported by kind of a robust Auxilius team. So you have your designated technical accounting lead, as well as a kind of supporting operations team, as I mentioned, analysts who are supporting with the upfront data mapping, data ingestion, and QA of everything going into the system, as well as on the clinical side specifically, we have clinical data experts on our end who are supporting with the data mapping and ingestion as well. So all of this to say, throughout the implementation, Auxilius is providing kind of a robust team of support to help with getting all of that data into the system and building out the kind of customized Auxilius models for you. And I want to talk for the rest of the conversation about how this experience went, both at Dynavax and Abcuro. Amazing. So I think we will switch gears and just get started on some questions. And as I said, audience, feel free to chime in the chat with any questions. But I think we really just wanted to start out. We'll structure this conversation kind of going through some high-level information about your individual implementations, and then dig into each of those different phases that I had pulled up and provide clarity on each and how they went within both the Dynavax and Abcuro implementations. So I think to start out, the first question we would love to hear, and maybe we can start off, Ricky, with the Abcuro experience. I would love for a little bit of additional context around the clinical trials, so the therapeutic area phase. I know you touched on this a little bit in your introduction that you have underway, and what that really means for managing your financials, what kind of challenges you're facing that may be unique to the scenario that you have at Abcuro right now.
Sure. So for us, I'll say we have primarily one asset. We have one asset in the clinic, and one of the things with the indication that we had, the phase 2/3 trial, in which it's inclusion body myositis. It's a neuromuscular disease. The challenge we had as a company was it was our first trial of that magnitude, where we were looking to enroll between 200 and 300 patients. Previously, we had ongoing trials that were less than 30 each. We had 2 trials ongoing. The challenge we were kind of put with, I'll focus for this audience as a finance group of folks, is how to deal with the dollar spend associated with that, where it could have been, I'll say, under $10 million to spend to a trial to something that could be upwards of $50 million. And how do we wrap our heads around the cracks that might have existed in our prior processes becoming canyons when the dollars associated become so impactful? Those are, I'll say, unique to Abcuro. That's what we were looking at, and how to solve for it preventatively. I could talk more about how we landed on Auxilius, but is that what you're looking for? Or?
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. I think the follow-up question I would have to that is how that kind of drove you to land on Auxilius and the unique situation you were in, how that kind of led to the need for an implementation like Auxilius.
Yep. So when you think of clinical trial accruals and your companies, and I'll focus first on the accounting side of things before the forecasting side of things. The clinical accruals are the focus of all the auditors. At every audit committee meeting we have, clinical accruals come up. At the annual audit, it is first and foremost, it's so complex, so much estimates in it. And there's also, before you get to even that, there's the requirement of an accounting and finance team the time spent to come up with that number. And what we really, when we were going into this phase 2-3 trial, we said we need a better process than what we have. We weren't concerned about our numbers, but we were concerned about the scalability of it. And when we gather all this information, putting it in an Excel spreadsheet is just a terrifying proposition for when you're looking at something for years to come. And I'd say when we looked for a solution and we landed on Auxilius, one of the really nice things that we saw was you could just take all your Excel files, your dozens of CTAs, your work orders, your CROs, and standardize them in one place, lock them down so that you're not chasing things and a fat finger on a formula sets off a $1 million error 6 months later, or understanding where your numbers are coming from. Everything is findable. So that's really what tailored us to Auxilius. And then with the implementation, I think the customization that Auxilius could do to fit your mold really provided a lot of the value for us. Whereas with larger solutions, not necessarily a clinical trial financial tracking system, but maybe like an ERP, you present, here's how we do things, and then you're told, okay, well, here's how the system can do it. And you kind of got to compromise. Auxilius is not that mold. Auxilius can handle whatever your complexity is, at least for our case, the system can standardize it, track it, handle it, so that we're not doing it manually.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And I think maybe before we dig into that in more detail, would love to hear kind of the same question on the Dynavax side. So maybe Dave, you can help us kind of understand a little bit of context around your clinical trials, therapeutic area phase, et cetera, and what kind of key challenges you were facing at the time where you made that decision to implement Auxilius.
Sure. I think a lot of what Ricky mentioned is similar to what Dynavax also experiences and faces. A lot of other clinical stage companies have those same challenges. In particular, Dynavax has a number of vaccine candidates in development. So we have a Tdap vaccine in phase 1. We have a shingles vaccine that treats older adults in phase 1. And then we're also collaborating with the Department of Defense in a phase 2 clinical trial for plague. Looking forward, one of the things that we wanted was a process and a solution that was highly scalable. What we found was the current approach is not entirely sustainable. We have a relatively small amount of finance and accounting team to be able to work on the clinical accruals every month. What we were doing is manually forecasting the R&D spend and calculating the accruals based on spreadsheet trackers, which was utilizing data that comes from the CRO that can be either untimely or lagging data. So one of the things that we wanted to try to address was kind of our limited bandwidth and find a solution that would be able to work on our close cycle in a shorter period of time. And again, less physical potential error with using manual spreadsheets. So, again, relying on vendor estimates for the accruals, which can often be delayed or maybe even incorrect, that does slow down the close process. We are reliant on our CROs that provide information from different parts of the country. When we get our billing from the CROs, they may not come on a timely manner. Again, every time we look at the information from the CROs and we're matching that up with our accrual tracker, it's highly manual. We're looking at specific cells. Although we do love spreadsheets as finance professionals, we don't want to spend so much time kind of going through all the quality checking of that. So being able to bring our clinical accrual process into a tool like Auxilius, especially during implementation, all the various pieces of information, being able to ingest it into the tool and being comfortable with all the assumptions that we set forth in our forecast methodology. And then also partnering with our clinical operations team to be able to also review all the estimates, bring in EDC data, have a good sense of all the investigator spend in real time. I think those are insights that we have a better sense of while using Auxilius.
Yeah, and I'll just say that the scalability that Dave mentioned, that having the ability to say have a process and use it for future trials or multiple trials is, without a system doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's it's a large amount of dollars that we currently have in clinical accruals, and then of course as we're looking to progress to phase 2 and phase 3 studies, where the number of participants and the clinical spend is going to expand drastically, we want to make sure that we have a process and a tool that's going to be able to grow with us.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing, I think, from both of you is just being at that point where you knew there was kind of growth in the future, there was going to be many more studies coming down the line, getting that process in place. It was really important that was kind of a key moment for you to get a system like Auxilius in place to set you up for success with that scale in the future.
Right.
Yeah, yep. I think that's what we hear across a lot of our sponsors who are implementing Auxilius, really recognizing that kind of transition point for them and identifying the time where it's important to pull in a system like Auxilius for sure. I want to jump back, Dave, to one of the things that you mentioned. I think early on, as you were talking through that, you mentioned you have a relatively small amount of finance and accounting, or a small team of your finance and accounting team is relatively small, which I think is just an interesting note when thinking about taking on an implementation like Auxilius or just implementing a new system. What in that gave you confidence, knowing lean team, obviously likely with competing priorities, gave you the confidence to be able to implement a system like Auxilius at the time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, I think it's leading up to the close, there's a lot of preparation in terms of information that we need, both internally and externally from our CRO, prepping all the clinical accrual tracker spreadsheets, and having the conversations with our clinical operations team to make sure we have the right assumptions, and then also specifically partnering with our accounting team to ensure that we have the right accrual in place. We have a relatively quick turnaround time. I'm sure most accounting teams have the same, where it's just several days for our accounting close. And what we found was that the clinical accrual process was very time-taking, and it was really one of the kind of pain points, or one of the issues that perhaps inhibited us from being able to close in a faster close cycle. So again, I think, with the tool itself, we don't have to wait until the end of the month. We don't have to necessarily request those pieces of information from the CRO, in terms of vendor estimates or billing. A lot of that does get automated, but we are able to kind of start the close process and review the forecast in advance of the end of the month and address those things with our internal teams as necessary. So being able to kind of spread out the work and be able to prepare for the close in advance of the end of the month, I think that's very helpful, given that we have a small team. The accounting team has a lot of other tasks to do when it comes to the end of the month for the month end close.
Yep. Makes total sense. So kind of even despite having a small team, it actually worked in your favor to implement Auxilius when you did, because it allowed for all of the roles to be doing the work when they had the capacity, versus everyone trying to do everything at once at the same time, as we see often with these processes. Yeah, I think makes a lot of sense. Perfect. Well, I think Emily would love to get your perspective. I think just given your experience implementing systems in general, if we think about just high level experience implementing Auxilius, would love your perspective on how this is compared to your past experience with implementations, whether it's with ERPs or other system, and what really worked well, and what the process looked like from your perspective.
Sure. Yeah, so I have done so many system implementations in my past, and Auxilius is my latest one. And I would have to say that it was the smoothest implementation, I would have to say. When you do a system implementation, there are three areas, or a few areas, that you worry about, if you would, is customization. Do you need to end up customizing the system to fit your needs? The other is, what are the integration points and how much work do you need to put in to build out that integration? And also people's availability from a project team perspective, in this case, Auxilius. You know, with Auxilius, we didn't have to customize any parts of Auxilius to fit our business needs. That's one thing. The other aspect is the integration. When you work with different data sources, external or internal, most of the time you would have to go out to those vendors and say, hey, can you provide us the data in this format? And then you go to the next vendor and say, can you provide it in this format so that we can ingest it in our system? But with Auxilius, I didn't see the need for that. When in whatever format you provide into Auxilius, Auxilius is able to consume it without any customization required from the data sources. So that's one plus. That's another plus. The other is people's availability. It's very key that Kristen's team had dedicated resources to work with us to implement this system smoothly, day in, day out. Whenever we need it, an email is sent out and response is getting, it's back within seconds. So I think that was very key, is availability of resources and also their expertise. Another aspect is the SOX controls. A lot of times when you implement new systems, there will be lack of controls in the system that you either have to build out in the system or introduce a new manual control. We didn't have to do much of that. The system is very robust with their, the closed checklist feature that Auxilius has. So those are the aspects that were all pluses in that implementation, and that's why I said it was the smoothest implementation I have managed in the past.
Amazing. Well, super glad to hear it. And I think you touched on a lot of different topics that I definitely want to dig into more deeply. So I think you mentioned the controls, definitely an area that I know was really important on the Dynavax side. So want to dig into that a little bit, as well as the integration and what that looks like. Maybe if we just start to dig a little bit more deeply into each of your implementations with Auxilius, we can kind of talk Dynavax as well as Abcuro, just understanding on both sides who was involved in your implementations and take a step back in that regard. Maybe Emily, if you want to talk from the Dynavax perspective, what teams you had involved, which stakeholders, who was kind of had a seat at the table during the implementation.
So people that were at the seat of the table were accounting folks, the accountants, the controller too. We have David representing FP&A, and we had ClinOps that worked with David directly or through David. And then we obviously have your team, and then we had the internal auditors team that we got involved at the beginning of the process definition. So that was very important. Most of the time, you wait until you've already defined your process, and then the internal auditors come in and say, well, there's something missing here, right? You need to add the control here, you need to add a control there, but we got them involved up front. So it's very key that you get your internal auditors involved at the beginning. So those are the team, and obviously IT, we needed IT to assist your technical team, Kristen, to build the integration, to pull in the invoices from Dynamics 365. That's our ERP. That was the one area that we spent where we need the technical team. Most of the other areas, it was just dealt with, within accounting, finance, and internal auditors.
Awesome. Yeah, and Ricky, was it a similar set of folks from your end that were involved in the implementation?
Similar functions, but we're a startup, so we're smaller. So IT didn't exist as an employee at Abcuro when we implemented Auxilius. So our team that really got us live on Auxilius was, we had FP&A, who manages our budget and does the clinical accruals for the pivotal trial. So that both sides, the accounting and the forecasting. Myself, we had ClinOps, only one person from ClinOps who voluntarily was involved in the process, who the main person running the trial. And they just wanted, we pitched them Auxilius and said, hey, you interested? They said yes. Generally, ClinOps people do care about budget. And so he's been involved. And then our Auxilius team really was like having an auditor on the inside to help us to guide through how to handle things and troubleshoot problems. From an IT perspective, we use NetSuite as our ERP, and I think thinking in advance of this from a technical integration standpoint, it's like there was like nothing. It was a nothing sandwich for us. It was very easy to get everything from our NetSuite environment into Auxilius. We use custom segments, so anything that could have been tricky, we didn't experience it. We're also private, so we have administrator access to NetSuite, so we could probably pull some strings if needed.
Amazing, yeah, and we see. I know you both mentioned D365 NetSuite, so we've implemented integrations across both of those, and I think that's generally the feedback we find from customers. Just tend to be relatively off-the-shelf implementations that we can hook up, and don't tend to take a lot of work. It sounds like you didn't even need IT involved on the Abcuro side, but I think that's an area that we really like to be able to pull information in quite quickly. Oh, and it looks like we have a few questions in the chat. Maybe we can start with Lauren's, which is directed at Emily. Emily, you mentioned that there wasn't much you had to do in terms of controls, which was an area we want to dive into, so we might as well just jump in there. Can you clarify if you had to add any controls, and if so, what kind of controls were needed to be added?
In that area, I would also ask David to chime in. But when I said we didn't have to do too much with the controls, meaning we didn't have to customize Auxilius, like adding any system controls from a customization perspective. That's what I meant when I said that. Yes, we have controls. We have about 10 controls, 11 controls that we have. Some of them are existing controls and some are new. So I'll ask David to chime in on that.
Yeah, certainly we have controls, and I think, working with our internal auditors during the implementation process to identify what are the key areas and how can we ensure that the controls are addressed by Auxilius, or tailoring our existing and upcoming processes to fit those. But certainly there's a large number of them. I think that does involve kind of accounting as well as clinical operations, regular discussions, regular meetings to be able to address all of those.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other questions are quite related to this topic, so maybe we can just kind of go through them and dig into the controls element and getting your auditors comfortable. As I think particularly for Dynavax, being a public company, getting your auditors comfortable with Auxilius, getting all of your controls set up was such a big part of you getting comfortable with the system. So I think, Christy, just to quickly answer your first question, does Auxilius have a SOC 1 report? Yes, we do have a SOC 1 report. We're happy to share that out to anyone who is interested in reviewing that. Just feel free to reach out, and I can actually put my email address in the chat and can send this through afterwards to anyone who needs it. The next question, maybe that we can just jump into in terms of the audit process from Meg, is how has the use of Auxilius impacted the external audit process? Do you find there is significant time required to walk auditors through the inputs and outputs? Dave or Emily, I'm not sure if one of you wants to take a stab at that question.
We're still relatively new in terms of getting the implementation on board. So I think it's been somewhat limited in terms of that, but we have walked the auditors through the process. I think it's been relatively streamlined there. I think one of the things that both from an external audit as well as from a Dynavax perspective, having an audit trail, having the monthly checklist where we have roles and responsibilities set forth in the tool, where on a monthly basis, each person's responsible for reviewing a key area and then locking that before you can complete the close cycle. So I think those are areas that are built into the technology, which is really helpful for us as well as auditors. Emily, was there anything else that you wanted to add on that?
No. Yeah, just to elaborate, right? David said your checklist in Auxilius is very robust, where we didn't have to customize Auxilius to add any new controls. They're all there in Auxilius already. Mm-hmm. And yeah, the key thing is to walk through your internal auditors up front to get their support, right, to prepare for the external reviews. So yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
And I'll add one thing. So I'll also say, so for Abcuro, we haven't been through a year-end audit with Auxilius yet, only because we started our implementation December 2023. So 2023 financials are audited clean via pre-Auxilius processes. But what I will say is we talked about Auxilius before implementing with our auditors. We use RSM, and they were pretty excited about it. Our auditors also attended. There was a webinar for Auxilius geared to auditors.
Yep.
That I can't believe it, but 2 of our audit team members actually attended it. So there's a lot of openness to it. The other thing I'll say from an audit perspective, if we I know SOX, it's for public companies, super important, critical. But if you think of auditing the actual numbers, in my experience being at prior public companies, sometimes it's not so easy to substantiate to an auditor where the numbers are coming from for the financial statement audit side of things. And one of the things that Auxilius gives you as a system is if you really wanted to, you could pick an individual patient and show the costs that have accumulated for that individual patient with a dollar amount at a certain date that an auditor could literally go to a CTA and find the visit cost and match it up and recalculate, which just thinking about how to do that outside of a system becomes just very challenging. So auditability beyond SOX controls, actually making sure 2 + 2 = 4 becomes a lot more feasible. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah. No, thank you, Ricky and Dave and Emily. I think all really, really insightful answers. And I know that Peter has just popped into the chat. We actually had a webinar, as Ricky mentioned, his auditors were there. We had a webinar a week or 2 ago specifically focused on auditor comfort with Auxilius. So we know that that's like very common question we get. We've definitely worked through getting auditors comfortable with the system and actually supporting customers through their year-end audits. So definitely happy to provide more context there. I think what you'll find, as Ricky said, is that there's a lot of outputs that come directly out of the system that are really targeted towards being able to provide your auditor with ongoing information so that they can see all of the backup for every single number in the system down to an individual patient. Our SOC also covers our kind of key outputs of the system. So one of the key outputs of the system is the journal entry report. So that's something that we've had a lot of auditors get really excited about, that's already covered within Auxilius's SOC. So they don't need to do additional review of the calculations that go into actually producing journal entries. But definitely happy to add more color there or also include links to these webinars that we've had on that topic. Awesome. Well, I want to address a couple more questions, and then I think I have a few more questions for our panelists. But I did notice that we just skipped a question from Christy, which was around multi-currency and integrations with other ERPs. So Auxilius is relatively agnostic to the ERP we are integrating with. So we've done really the vast majority of ERPs, NetSuite, Sage Intacct, D365, sort of any of the big systems, as well as P2Ps, Coupa, et cetera. And it really is just dependent on whether or not they can expose an API to us. And then our technical teams will do all the work in setting up that integration on our end. So ideally, very little lift on the sponsor side. As you heard, Ricky's team didn't even pull in IT for that. So something that Auxilius can set up as long as the data is able to be exposed directly out of the ERP.
And we use multi-currency with no problem, in case that's helpful.
Yes. Yep, exactly. There's kind of auto currencies calculated within the system that can be leveraged, and we can also pipe in that data in multiple currencies from the integration. And then I think another question from Christy here is just around the implementation resulting in materially different numbers than what have been calculated in your Excel-based process, and perhaps how you got comfortable with that if there were differences.
Sure, I can speak to that. I don't think the implementation resulted in any estimates from the CRO. And I think those at times can be lagging, and those data may not necessarily be contemporary. What we found is at times forecasts or projections from the CROs can swing pretty wildly. I don't think it's the CRO's priority to be projecting expense numbers. That's not really their particular day job. What we do enjoy about the tool itself is, again, we are setting forth the parameters, we're setting the forecast methodology, and we're also getting real-time information based on EDC reports that are fed live. So I think we have good confidence in terms of the expense that is being shown within Auxilius is timely and accurate.
And I think part of it, in terms of like concerns around materially different numbers, in Abcuro's case, and I have to imagine other people are similar, the customizations that you're able to build into the model in Auxilius are so closely aligned to Excel-based processes that for our unusual invoiceable scenario that we deal with, we're able to handle something like that in Auxilius to make sure that we're not all of a sudden going to have an auditor say, why is this number vastly different from what you told us a year ago? I will just say though, I don't think it would be, the expectation for Auxilius shouldn't be, if you have no process whatsoever, that this is going to miraculously overnight make the most robust clinical financial tracking software. Auxilius is, for me, the biggest value prop is it takes our manual processes that got right numbers, standardizes, and makes it scalable. It's not like if the way I think about it, if we were going to put in a purchasing system at Abcuro and didn't have an approval matrix, you're not going to have a purchasing system because it needs to have rules to abide by. Same thing with clinical accruals. If you don't have a process to begin with, you can't model it out. I just think that's an important thing to say.
Yeah, I think it's great context, and probably just to add into that, and I know we touched on this a little bit at the beginning, as we work through these implementations with our customers, one of the first things that we'll do with sponsors is review your existing processes and map those so understanding exactly what your process is prior to implementing Auxilius. And within that, we're going to be mapping out how you can be leveraging different modules within the system. So currently, if your process is get your vendor estimates from your CRO and use those as your expense estimate, you can 100% replicate that process within the system and have that vendor estimate sit within the system. If you're using EDC data and pulling specific reports, we will model out that process to look exactly like what you are doing offline. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is get a lot of data sources side by side so you can make the most intelligent decisions. But Auxilius does not enforce any kind of decision making on behalf of the sponsor. It's really getting that data available for you so you can continue to make those decisions and likely continue with processes that you were doing prior to implementing the system. Ricky, I think that's a similar point to what you were getting at there, hopefully.
Yes. Yeah, we were right. We haven't been, Auxilius did immaterially make things better for us, things that we hadn't been considering or tracking just because time is limited, but it was not material. And I'd also say awesome. if it does uncover something material, which it shouldn't, but anything can happen, you ultimately do want the right answer. Yeah. But Auxilius didn't. I have not heard of that happening, but not with us, not with a couple folks I've talked to that use it.
Perfect. Well, I know we've covered a lot of ground using these questions. I want to jump back. So I know we've talked a little bit about the integrations and what that process looks like, as well as digging into Dynavax's kind of one of the key focuses being on building out those controls and making sure their auditors were comfortable with the system. Ricky, I know on the Abcuro side, one of the key focuses with Auxilius, from my understanding, was getting that clinical model to be just right, just having that investigator intelligence model built out, pulling in that EDC data. Would love to hear a little bit about your experience setting that up with Auxilius, what worked, what some of the challenges you were facing were in building out that investigator model.
Sure. So one of the things that we did before Auxilius was we had 3 different points for investigator expenses, which is our most complex tracking. We had our EDC data. We had a report from IRT that our ClinOps team would give us that gave a snapshot of how our patients are doing, who's active, the last visit, but not full EDC data. And then we had a manual Excel patient tracker. And we would basically triangulate each of them manually every month to make sure we had the most complete data. And one of the things that we did in our manual patient tracker was we could actually forecast out. We know the protocol. We know when patients started on our trial. So if we're expecting, I'll call 8 visits in the month that we're closing, and our EDC said 7, our manual tracker was able to say, you're missing a visit here. And for our model in Auxilius, the team was able to build for us that same patient tracker, no longer in Excel, in Auxilius, and could literally have like visit 1, 2, 3, 4, and it'll highlight for us if a visit should have happened based on the protocol and the dosing date, but it's not in the EDC. Because that's one of the big risks with clinical accruals is your EDC's lagging data or missing data. And so we used to do it in Excel. We showed it to Auxilius, and then it just was there. And like, so that I think is a real value add to us to just know we're hyper focused on EDC completeness, not because it's material if a visit's missing, more if it's systemic, that there is a systemic issue of getting data into the EDC. We need to know about it before it gets out of control.
Yeah, I think makes a lot of sense and ends up being kind of one of the areas where sponsors see the most value in implementing more automation, given how hard that process, Ricky, that you just walked through is to support directly within Excel, for sure. David, Emily, I'm curious. Oh, go ahead.
I'll say we've been burned before in smaller trials where we realized the EDC reports we were relying on may have had some tweak that we didn't know something was missing or misrepresented. So Auxilius is able to solve for that to make sure we're using the right inputs. No, okay.
Yep, I think that makes a lot of sense. No, I was just going to ask Dave and Emily, just in regards to the kind of investigator intelligence on the Dynavax side. I know you're working in a very different therapeutic area. Just curious about your experience in implementing that, whether it's a process you had prior to implementing Auxilius or whether that was kind of net new intelligence into the investigator piece.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits that Ricky also touched upon was being able to have multiple sources of data that you can kind of hone in on. So specific to the investigator grants, again, having EDC information, also consultation with our clinical operations team, looking at patient trackers, and then our internal forecast, just having those multiple data points, being able to get comfortable with what we're saying, what the system is saying, and then also what the CRO is telling us. That gives us kind of a greater level of confidence and being able to kind of select what makes the most sense. So we do have that customizability within the tool to be able to set what your forecast logic is within investigator grants. Mm-hmm. And I think that's particularly helpful.
Yep, definitely. I think we hear that across a lot of sponsors. Amazing. Well, I appreciate that insight, particularly into the clinical model. I know we have about 10 minutes left, so just a couple more questions from my end, but definitely feel free to post more questions in the chat to anyone in the audience. I think those were great at guiding this discussion and kind of touched on a lot of the things we wanted to talk about with folks on the phone here. I was just curious for both teams around your Auxilius support team. So I know throughout this implementation, you had a technical accounting lead who was really kind of guiding you through the process. Curious how you leaned on them throughout this process and what those ongoing interactions were like, timing wise, meeting wise, what your relationship looked like with your support lead.
Sure. I can just
go first, Dave.
Okay. Thanks, Ricky. In terms of implementation, getting the trial set up within the tool itself, I think the team was extremely helpful in again, getting all the data, all the various contracts, change orders, various EDC reports ingested into the tool in a pretty timely fashion. And then also kind of as we are progressing through, when we get new information, just either uploading the data specifically into the tool or passing that on to, via email. The team's always been very responsive in addressing that. And, I'll usually get a notification within either email or the tool itself that, the information's been ingested. Go ahead and review and confirm the changes have been made to our expectations. So I think that's extremely helpful. Again, we get a lot of pieces of data, a lot of information, a lot of documents, and being able to have it all housed in one central location and have one source of truth without the manual intervention, I think is helps us sleep a little bit better at night. But again, I think that the team itself, in terms of hypercare and implementation, has always been extremely responsive. When we have specific questions, they're able to hop on a call and explain things or customize if we want to. Again, have the investigator module shown a little bit differently. If we have a certain protocol that's specific to a study, they'll be able to help us assist with that.
Yeah, and I'd say for us, our implementation team, especially the technical accounting folks, seem to just live and breathe clinical trial accruals and forecasting. And I would drive myself up a wall if I was reviewing site agreements all day. But like, we literally would send 40 site agreements and they would get through them. I don't even know how long it took because it was ready whenever we needed it. But for us to do that, it would have taken a lot of time, probably manual errors in it. And the other thing that's from the technical accounting side is the Auxilius team knows what to look for in these contracts. Work orders with CROs and site agreements are dozens of pages long, and sometimes you're looking for the random sentence that says, I don't know, $5,000 in quarterly IRB fees, and you may not catch it, but Auxilius sees this from all their clients and all their trials and will help you kind of stay on the straight and narrow. So we've gotten a lot of value out of that. I'd say the general theme is any question we ask, we get a thoughtful response, and the team is always ready when we need them. Normally they're waiting on us because we have some competing priority, and not the other way around.
Awesome. Well, love to hear that. And I think what I heard across both Dave and Ricky, what you said there was just being able to bring some kind of best practices to and just general knowledge of the space. As you said, Ricky, the team is living, breathing this type of data, so can bring that expertise, but also kind of turnarounds and processing of the data that really supports with this. Great to hear. I think knowing that we're kind of a time, probably have one final question I would love to get all of your perspective on was just generally kind of anything you wish you knew on day one going in at this place implementation you can share with the group.
Day one, what we wish we knew, I think. Do you guys want to go first?
No, feel free, Ricky.
Okay. So, I mean, for me, what I wish, a lot of times it's talking to other people, talking to another company that had gone through the implementation, it's because you just hear what to focus on. And because it's just always helpful, I'd say. The other thing for us is from day one, take it seriously. You're building a model here, and so this is not the time to say it's close enough or like let it go. Really say like, why is something different than our manual processes, or make it work to what you want. I'll say like a critical success factor for the longevity of using a system like Auxilius. You're setting something up to be scalable, so when it's still small, make that scale very accurate. That'd be my bit. Dave, Emily.
Sure. I think this is something that Emily, was responsible for and, was aware of right away, was getting all the key stakeholders involved early on and having their buy-in on this. Any type of new tool or system implementation always can be either challenging or take quite a bit of time. I found it was relatively smooth, but I think that was because Emily was, really responsible in terms of finding out who needed to have a seat at the table, get their input, and address any potential challenges up front. So Emily was, very critical in terms of providing that path and making sure that we had the necessary meetings and getting it right the first time. Emily, anything else, Emily?
Yeah, getting it right the first time will also include, again, like I said, internal auditors to prepare for that external audit. At the end of the day, yeah. Thank you, David.
Hey, my name's Peter. I've been on the back end helping manage the tech here. It looks like Kristen has lost her connection, but if there are any other questions, happy to answer them real quick. Otherwise, we can close out here. Well, thank everybody for joining. Thanks to our panelists. It was so great to spend some time with you, and I hope everyone found this really helpful. If you have any other questions, after the session, feel free to reach out to Kristen. You'll all be getting a recording of this a little bit later today. And thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Bye-bye.